Level 1. The induction of the broad stripe. Your sandals scrape against marble, worn smooth by centuries of senators, and the sound carries farther than you expected in the cold morning air. A lictor staff cracks twice against the bronze doors of the Curia, and the noise rolls through your chest like something final. It's early in the year 63 B.C. That's it. And 600 men in white togas turn their heads toward the entrance as you step through it. Every one of them wears the same thin purple stripe now stitched along your own shoulder, the latest clavus, the mark of the Ordo Senatorius. Your throat goes dry. Because the stripe means something the fabric itself can't explain. Property worth what historians estimate at close to 1,000,000 sesterces. Land. Family name. Years of small offices finally adding up to this single doorway. The senator who sponsored your entry walks 2 paces ahead of you, his hand briefly resting on your shoulder before he lets go. He doesn't look back. In this room, a public gesture of favor is worth more than a private word ever could be. You find your bench near the back wall, on the side reserved for men who have not yet held curial office, the pedari, the ones who vote but do not speak. The crescent-shaped ivory buckle on your new senatorial shoes catches the light, and you catch yourself staring at it instead of the men around you. Consulars sit closest to the curial chairs at the front, their voices called first in every debate, their names remembered by history before yours is even learned by the doorkeeper. You are called last, if you're called at all. Your vote is cast, not with words but with your feet, crossing the floor to stand beside the man you agree with. The presiding consul rises, and the chamber falls into the kind of quiet that feels rehearsed by generations before you were born. His name is Marcus Tullius Cicero, elected consul the year before, a man who climbed this rank without inherited nobility, purely on the strength of his voice. He speaks of grain shortages, of debts-crushing farmers across Italy, of a candidate for consul who lost the election twice and has grown dangerous in his losing. You don't yet know the name Lucius Sergius Catiline well enough to feel the weight it will carry by winter, but you notice how quickly the room grows tense at its mention. Your patron leans towards you during a pause in the session, his voice barely above a whisper against the marble echo of the hall. "Watch the currents beneath the calm," he says, and then he straightens before you can ask what he means. The session runs past midday, the smell of oil lamps mixing with sweat and old stone, your legs stiff from sitting motionless on a bench with no back support. When the doors finally open again, sunlight floods the chamber floor, and you step out into a city that has no idea yet how close it stands to catching fire. Level 2. The bench of the pedari. They settle into a rhythm you didn't expect from a position of such supposed power. Mostly listening, mostly silence, mostly watching men above you decide what Rome will become. You rise before dawn each day for the morning salutatio, greeting your patron at his home along with dozens of other clients hoping for his favor and his favors in return. Your household slave, the one who now dresses you in the toga's careful folds, jokes that you fidget with the fabric more than any senator he's served. Inside the Curia, you learn the order of speaking the way a soldier learns formation. Consulars, then praetorians, then the rest, ranked by the offices they've already held. By the time a question reaches your row, most debates have already been decided by louder voices with older names, and your only task is to walk to one side or the other. A modern person might assume a senator commanded armies or issued laws by decree, but most days your power amounts to standing in the correct place at the correct moment. Your patron begins bringing you into smaller gatherings after formal sessions. Quiet conversations in private houses where the real decisions of Rome are quietly rehearsed before ever reaching the floor. You start to notice a man named Catiline more often now. His name passed between senators in tones that shift between contempt and something closer to fear. He lost the consular election again this year, and rumors move through the forum about armed men gathering in Etruria, about debts he promises to cancel if given power. Your patron dismisses the talk at first, calling it election season noise, the kind every losing candidate generates when his pride outlives his chances. But you notice he stops dismissing it quite so easily by the second week of October, when the whisper stops sounding like rumor and starts sounding like warning. One evening, you're asked to carry a folded wax tablet from your patron to another senator's house, a small errand that makes your chest tighten with unearned importance. You don't read it. You tell yourself that not reading it is loyalty, though some part of you wonders if it's only fear of what you might find. The senator who receives it thanks you by name for the first time since your induction, and the small courtesy lodges itself somewhere you didn't expect to feel proud. Word spreads that Cicero has doubled his personal guard, that he sleeps with a blade near his bed, that informants have started coming to him after dark. You lie awake that night listening to the sounds of the street below your rented rooms, wondering what kind of city keeps its own consul afraid to sleep. Level 3, the machinery of consent. By late October, the Senate convenes for a session unlike any you've attended. The benches fuller than usual, the air carrying a tension you can almost taste. Cicero stands before the assembled body and announces that he has received credible warning of an armed uprising, backed by claims from informants inside the conspiracy itself. The consul asks the Senate to pass the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, the final decree, granting the consuls power to take whatever measures they judge necessary to protect the state. You watch the older senators exchange glances before rising, because this decree has been used only a handful of times before, and never without consequence for someone. The chamber votes and the decree passes. You feel the weight of it less as an idea and more as a physical shift in the room, a held breath released too early. Outside, the city continues as if nothing has changed. Bakers shouting prices, cartwheels grinding over paving stones, the smell of fish sauce drifting up from the market stalls near the forum. But armed men now stand at intersections you've never seen guarded before, and your patron tells you to avoid the streets near the Capitoline after dark. Catiline himself appears in the Senate one morning, taking his seat as though nothing is wrong, and the men around him rise and move away, leaving him surrounded by empty benches. Cicero turns toward him directly and begins speaking without notes, his voice rising until it fills every corner of the Curia Hostilia. You've heard senators speak with skill before, but you've never felt words used like this. Not persuasion, but exposure, laid out fact by fact until the man across the room has nowhere left to sit comfortably. Catiline leaves Rome that same night, publicly claiming exile, privately marching toward the armed camp already forming in Etruria under a former officer named Manlius. Your patron tells you this proves the conspiracy was real, that the coward's flight is confession enough for anyone still doubting. You want to agree with him fully, the way you agree with everything he says, but a small, uncomfortable part of you notices that a man's absence is not the same as his guilt. That night you fall asleep, turning over his warning from weeks earlier, the one about currents beneath calm water, and you understand now it wasn't a metaphor at all. Level 4, the whisper in the forum. November arrives quieter than you expect, the Senate meeting less often, Catiline's absence settling over the city like held breath no one wants to release too soon. You spend your days now doing something closer to actual work, reviewing petitions, sitting in on financial hearings, learning the tedious paperwork beneath the marble grandeur you imagined as a boy. Rumors move faster than official news. Someone tells you conspirators remain inside Rome itself, senators and equestrians still loyal to the man who fled, waiting for a signal to strike. You start watching faces around you differently, wondering which familiar voice from the backbenches might be reporting to Cicero, or worse, still reporting to Catiline. Your patron grows harder to read during this stretch, arriving late to gatherings, leaving early, answering questions about the conspiracy with careful general phrases instead of his usual bluntness. One afternoon, you catch him in quiet conversation with a man you don't recognize. Their voice is low, their expressions closing the moment they notice you approaching. He tells you it was nothing. An old debt discussed between friends, but his eyes don't hold yours the way they usually do when he explains something simple. You choose to believe him because the alternative, that the man who sponsored your entire political life might be entangled in this, is a thought you can't yet afford to finish. A fellow pedarius, seated 2 benches from you, begins asking pointed questions about which senators supported the final decree and which ones hesitated before rising. You realize he's keeping a private list, the kind that could protect a man during a crisis or condemn him later, depending entirely on how the crisis ends. Late in the month, word spreads that Cicero has intercepted something significant. Envoys from a Gallic tribe called the Allobroges, approached by conspirators seeking military support for the uprising. The envoys, it said, went straight to Cicero instead, choosing loyalty to Rome over the promises made to them in secret meetings near the forum. Your patron hears this news, standing beside you, and for the first time in weeks, you watch the color drain slightly from his face before he catches himself. You don't ask him why. Some part of you already suspects the answer would cost you something you're not ready to lose. Level 5, the seals of the Allobroges. On the night of the 2nd of December, soldiers stop a small party crossing the Mulvian Bridge just north of the city, acting on information passed directly from the Allobroge's envoys themselves. Among the men captured are couriers carrying sealed letters, their wax stamps still intact, addressed to conspirators believed to remain hidden inside Rome. By dawn, you're summoned to an emergency session, the Curia filling faster than you've ever seen it. Senators arriving still adjusting their togas in the doorway. Cicero stands before the assembly holding the letters themselves, unbroken, the seals presented as proof that nothing inside them has been altered or invented. One by one, the seals are shown to the men whose names are attached to them, and one by one, those men are asked to confirm the wax is theirs. You watch a senator's hands shake as he examines his own seal pressed into red wax, his voice barely audible when he's asked to acknowledge it. The letters are broken open and read aloud to the entire Senate, describing plans for arson inside the city and an armed uprising to support Catiline's forces already gathered near Faesulae. A modern audience might imagine trials with lawyers and juries, but here, the evidence is verified through witnesses, seals, and testimony delivered directly on the Senate floor in a single sitting. 4 men are named as ringleaders still inside Rome, arrested that same day, brought before the assembled Senate in a scene closer to public reckoning than legal proceeding. Your chest goes hollow when you recognize one of the names. A senator who sat 2 rows ahead of you just weeks earlier, nodding along during ordinary debates about grain prices. Your patron sits utterly still through the entire reading, his jaw locked, his eyes fixed on a point somewhere past the accused men, rather than on their faces. After the session, he tells you plainly that he had heard rumors involving that senator weeks ago and said nothing, hoping the man would simply lose his nerve before acting. Silence isn't loyalty, you tell him. The words leaving you before you've decided to say them? He doesn't answer. He simply walks ahead of you into the crowded street, leaving you standing alone with a sentence you can't take back. Level 6, the 4th oration. 3 days later, on the 5th of December, the Senate convenes again, and this time everyone understands that today's session will decide the fate of the captured men. Cicero rises to speak first, delivering what will later be called his 4th oration against Catiline, laying out the evidence again for anyone still unwilling to accept it. He tells the assembled senators that the choice before them isn't between mercy and cruelty, but between a republic that survives and one that burns. The conspiracy is proven, he says. Rome now asks what price protects her. That's. You feel the floor of the Curia seem to narrow beneath you. The enormity of the coming vote settling into your stomach like cold water. The question on the table is simple to state and impossible to answer cleanly. What punishment fits 5 Roman citizens caught planning arson and armed revolt against their own city? Under the Sempronian law, a citizen cannot be executed without a trial before the popular assembly, a protection built specifically to guard against exactly this kind of emergency overreach. But the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, passed weeks earlier, grants the consul's authority to act as the safety of the state requires. And 5 men now sit imprisoned under armed guard awaiting that judgment. You watch the senior senators debate the legal tension openly, some arguing the decree overrides the law in moments of true crisis, others warning that no crisis justifies abandoning it. Your patron rises to speak for the first time all day, his voice steadier than you expected, arguing for restraint, for imprisonment in towns across Italy rather than execution. You stare at him from the back bench, your palms damp against your knees, unable to reconcile the cautious man, now speaking with the one who taught you every rule of this chamber. A senator near you leans over and whispers that support seems to be swinging toward the harsher punishment. That momentum in the room has a way of becoming its own kind of law. You think of the sealed letters, the wax stamps, the shaking hands of men confirming their own guilt. And you wonder if restraint is wisdom, or simply fear dressed as principle. The session is adjourned before a vote is taken, the decision pushed to the following day, leaving the 5 imprisoned men and 600 senators to spend one more night uncertain. Level 7, the 2 voices. The next morning, the Curia is packed tighter than you've ever seen it. Senators standing along the walls when the benches run out of room. Gaius, Julius Caesar, a rising praetor-elect known for his sharp political instincts, rises to speak against execution, arguing for lifelong imprisonment in separate towns instead. Kill them, and you kill the law itself, he warns, his voice calm in a room desperate for someone to sound calm. He argues that Rome has never executed a citizen without trial, and that breaking this precedent, even against traitors, hands future tyrants a justification they'll happily use again. Several senators nod along, visibly relieved to hear an argument that lets them avoid the harsher choice without appearing weak in front of their colleagues. Then, Marcus Porcius Cato rises, and the room's temperature seems to drop the moment he begins speaking, his tone sharper than anything you've heard from him before. He argues that mercy toward men who plotted to burn the city and slaughter its senators isn't wisdom, but weakness, and that hesitation now invites the next conspiracy tomorrow. He reminds the chamber that the state's survival outweighs the comfort of legal formality, and that history will judge caution far more harshly than it judges resolve. You feel the room's mood shift almost physically, like weight tipping from one side of a scale to the other with every sentence Cato delivers. Your patron's face tightens beside you, and you realize with a small, uncomfortable jolt that he came into this session already knowing which way the tide would turn. A fellow pedarius beside you mutters that whichever way the vote falls, someone in this room will pay for it eventually, whether in a year or in 20. You think of the senator arrested days earlier, his hand shaking over his own broken seal, and wonder what kind of mercy or justice a burned city would have shown him instead. Cicero calls for the vote to proceed by dissessio, senators dividing physically to either side of the chamber to declare where they stand. You realize, with your stomach tightening into a knot, that for the first time since your induction, your silent vote is about to become the loudest thing you've ever done. Level 8, the walk to the side. The chamber falls into motion, senators rising from their benches and crossing the floor toward one side or the other, sandals scraping against marble in a sound like slow, uneven rain. Consulars move first, their choices setting a visible current that pulls the room behind them the way current pulls water downstream. Your patron rises slowly, and for a moment you think he might surprise you, might cross toward the side, arguing for restraint the way his earlier words suggested he would. Instead, he stands still at the edge of his bench, unwilling to fully commit either direction, a stillness that reads to the entire room as its own kind of answer. Your legs feel heavier than they should as you rise from the backbench, aware of how few eyes in this chamber will even register that you've moved at all. You think of the sealed letters, the shaking hands, the smell of the imprisoned men's fear when they were dragged before the Senate 3 days earlier. You think of the burned granaries such an uprising would have left behind, the neighbors and shopkeepers who never asked to be caught inside someone else's ambition. You walk toward the side calling for execution, your sandals loud against the stone, your patron watching you cross without a single word passing between you. The vote is counted, and the decision is confirmed. The 5 conspirators will be put to death that same day, without trial before the popular assembly. A modern viewer might expect ceremony, but the process that follows is swift and administrative, closer to a magistrate's order than any solemn ritual of judgment. Cicero himself walks the short distance from the Curia toward the Tullianum that afternoon. A crowd along the route silent in a way Rome rarely allows itself to be. Your patron finds you afterward in the emptying chamber, his voice low, almost gentle, though the words themselves cut cleaner than anger ever could. "You've made your name today," he says, and you can't tell if it's a compliment or a warning. He walks away before you can answer, and you stand alone on the marble floor, aware that whatever bond sponsored your seat here has just quietly ended. Level 9, the silence beneath the Capitol. The Tullianum sits below the northeastern slope of the Catiline, a cramped stone chamber accessed through a narrow opening cut into the floor of the room above it. You aren't required to attend the execution, but something pulls you toward the crowd gathering near the site anyway, your breath shallow in the cold December air. You don't see the act itself. Few outside the guards do, but you hear the crowd's reaction ripple backward through the street the moment it's finished. Cicero emerges and speaks 2 words to the waiting crowd, confirming the sentence has been carried out, a phrase Romans will repeat for generations after this night. "They have lived," he says, using the old euphemism Romans reserved for the dead, and the crowd's murmur rises into something between relief and unease. You stand there long after most of the crowd disperses, your ears still ringing faintly from the noise, your mind replaying the moment your sandals crossed that marble floor. You think about the senator whose hand shook over his own broken seal, a man who sat 2 rows ahead of you just weeks earlier, discussing grain prices like anyone else. You think about the Sempronian law, the protection built to guard every citizen from exactly this kind of ending, and the vote you cast to set it aside. Word moves through the city by nightfall that Cicero is being hailed in the streets as the savior of the Republic, showered with praise from crowds relieved the threat has passed. But you also hear, quieter, for men who won't say it loudly, that a citizen was killed today without trial, and that precedent doesn't forget its own shape once it's set. You return to your rented rooms that night and sit without lighting a lamp, listening to the city outside behaving as if nothing irreversible happened at all. You understand, sitting in that darkness, that you've proven exactly the kind of senator you wanted to be seen as, and you're no longer certain that was worth proving. Level 10, the shadow on the Curia floor. Months pass, and Rome settles back into its ordinary rhythms. The grain market's loud again, the forum crowded with petitioners who've already half forgotten December's tension. Catiline himself dies weeks later in a battle near Pistoria, his rebel army destroyed. His cause ending not in the Senate, but on a cold Italian hillside. Historians will later debate the exact location of. Cicero is celebrated publicly as the man who saved the Republic from fire and slaughter, given the rare honorary title Pater Patriae, father of his country. You return to your bench among the pedarii, your rank unchanged, your voice still called last if it's called at all, as though the vote that once felt so enormous barely registered in the chamber's memory. Your patron never speaks to you about that day again, and the distance between your benches, though only a few paces of marble, feels far wider than it ever did before. You hear, years later, that critics of Cicero begin quietly questioning the legality of executing citizens without trial, using the very arguments Caesar raised that December morning. The Sempronian law, it turns out, doesn't forget as easily as a crowded chamber does, and its ghost follows the men who set it aside for the rest of their careers. You think often of the crescent buckle on your senatorial shoes, the same detail that once felt like proof you belonged, now just a small shape of ivory catching lamplight. Some evenings, you walk back into the empty Curia after session's end, when the benches are bare and the echo of 600 voices has finally settled into silence. You stand on the exact spot where you once crossed the floor, staring down at marble that shows no trace of the choice made on top of it. You never learn whether history will remember your name at all. One pedarius among 600, one pair of sandals among the crowd that walked toward death that December morning. What you carry instead is quieter than fame, the understanding that the Republic's laws are only as solid as the men willing to stand behind them when standing costs something. You think of the senator whose hands shook over his own seal, of your patron's stillness at the edge of his bench, of the 2 words spoken outside the Tullianum that night. Rome will go on for decades yet, its laws bent and mended and bent again by men who all believed, as you once did, that their choice was the necessary one. Standing alone in the dim Curia, you can't decide if you helped save something that day or simply watched the first small crack appear in something no vote could ever fully repair.